This week I wanted to kind of give you a different take on panoramas, okay? Because so often we think of a panorama as, we're going to stitch together, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames that are going to be across a very, very wide scene, okay? Well, I want you to think of a panorama in a different way, where sometimes you can shoot a panorama that doesn't have to be this huge, wide scene. Maybe you shoot a panorama, or maybe you shoot like you would shoot a panorama just to get a bigger image, just to capture more area in a place where you happen to be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this long, wide photo that we envision when we think of a panorama. So here's an example. I was out at some waterfalls, and I got down pretty close to the waterfall, just about as close as I could, and I realized, with my wide angle lens, I was still having a hard time capturing the whole scene. Okay. And so what I had to do is I had to zoom out really wide. But then everything started to look, for example, everything up here, it started to look really small if I zoomed out to the widest setting on my lens. And so when you do that, you tend to make everything that looks off in the distance, it tends to get very, very small. So what I did is I kind of zoomed in a little bit and I photographed the scene like I would photograph a panorama. But instead of taking, 7, 8, or 9 different photos across, I only took 3, okay? Because that's all I really needed to capture this scene. So here's the example. So I'm starting off in Lightroom. You could just as easily, we could be in Photoshop, and you could come up here to the File menu, go down to Automate, and you could go down to Photo Merge and select your panorama files. I just happen to be starting off in Lightroom here. We go down to the photo menu, go to edit in, and we'll choose merge to panorama in Photoshop. All right, it's going to open up, kind of drop everything and move it over into Photoshop. You get this photo merge dialog box in Photoshop, which is the same thing you would have gotten had we started in the file menu. You choose your files here, take automatic, click OK. And so Photoshop's going to go through the process of stitching everything together for you here. And when it comes out, when it's done, I think you're going to be surprised at the shape, because we, again, typically think of a panorama as this really wide image. Okay. It's never a very tall image. It just happens to be really wide, where in this example here, you're going to see that our final product is not a really wide image, but it's an image that lets us capture the entire scene. Okay, and here's an example. Don't mind these little cracks. They're actually just fragments, and you might see them on your computer too. You'll see when I zoom in, they go away. They're just fragments of all these little layer masking and all the merging that's going on behind the scenes in Photoshop. What I always do when I get here is I just choose layer, and I just choose merge layers. Okay, because that merges them all together. I don't need all those layer masks because I'm never going to do anything with them. So check this out though. So we don't have what we typically think of as a panoramic image here, but what we do have is an image that captured the entire scene. When I zoomed out, when I had a 16 to 35 millimeter lens on for this, when I zoomed all the way out to 16, this waterfall back here, because of the way the perspective is on a zoom lens, this waterfall back here looked so small. Okay, but now I can get this feeling that the image, it has that larger than life type of a feel to it, much like when I was there and I was able to capture the whole scene. And all we have to do here is just to finish things up, we would take our crop tool, and I'm going to leave a couple of the edges. I'm not going to crop the whole thing out because I'm going to show you a little trick that I always try. We'll even rotate it around just a little bit here. But I'm going to show you a little trick that I always try whenever I have an image like this, because I don't want to crop in too much of this, because, well, it's part of the image here. So I'll just crop in a little bit here at the bottom, a little bit at the top, because we don't need all that white sky. That's not really helping the image much. And a little bit more on the left-hand side. Press enter or return. And then when you go and you see these little extra areas here, here's something you can try. Go to your quick selection tool. Right under it is the magic wand, and just click on it. And then choose edit, fill, use content aware, click OK. And Photoshop's going to think for a second. And most of the time, when you get down to these edges, it does a great job. Here's another little tip for you, because you see the seam that we have here. See if I zoom in, see how it left a little seam. I could go in there and maybe try to retouch it. I'm going to undo. All right, I'm going to undo a couple of times, and I'm going to do select. I'm going to go down to modify, and I'm going to choose expand, and I'm going to expand it by about 4 pixels. Okay, and that's just going to expand the edge of that selection, and then we're going to try to go to content aware one more time. Click OK. Deselect, and you see it got rid of that edge for me. And so it went in here and it just filled all that in. It's amazing technology. This one is simple. We shouldn't have too much trouble with this one, but we'll go select, modify, expand by 4 pixels, go into content aware one more time. And there we go. So it fills all those little gaps in. There's a tiny little one. This one would almost be easier to take your clone stamp tool, sample, and just paint over it with your clone stamp tool. I don't think we have anything here. And honestly, if we're being picky, which I am, I'd probably take my clone stamp tool and just close up that little hole that we had in the sky there because it wasn't doing too much for me. If I were to finish this up in any way, I could go into levels, Command L on the Mac, Control L on a PC, and just bring that in just a hair, like so. And then we could always go to add a vibrance adjustment layer. It's that little upside down triangle here, and that's just going to boost the color for me. Maybe even a little bit of saturation there. Okay, so that would just fix things up for me. That's probably a little too strong, so you can reduce the opacity. But there you have it. You have an image that would be very, very difficult to capture when you were there. Sometimes you just don't have a wide enough angle lens to be able to capture it. This is a great alternative. Here's the other added benefit to this. Is we used to have to shoot panoramas. You know, think of shooting a panorama 8 years ago with maybe an 8 megapixel camera. Well, if you wanted to be able to print it at any decent size, you used to have to you'd have to shoot a very, very wide image. You'd have to shoot a lot of frames in there to be able to get that resolution up. Well, think about the resolution of the cameras today. Imagine how big we could print this. I was shooting this with a D800, so it's a humongous file. But even your other cameras, your 15 megapixel cameras, your 20 megapixel cameras, imagine taking 3 of those photos and putting them together. Imagine the resolution. Look at the one on this one. Okay, so you can see here, we could print this out as a 15 by 17, and you can probably even get higher than that. So there's a lot to be said for shooting something this way. Maybe if you don't have one of those huge megapixel cameras, shoot it this way and you get that extra megapixel. So you see here, I mean, I could zoom in, I could keep zooming into this thing, and we're going to get as detailed as possible by going in here. Okay, that's at 100%. So we got lots of detail, lots of places to be able to print this one big if we wanted to. Okay, folks, hope you enjoyed the tutorial. My name is Matt Kloskowski, and I will talk to you again very soon.